When there's no room left in hell, the dead shall walk the earth. Thank you, George Romero. Saturday, 11 April 2020, the day after Christ died on the cross. God is dead. That's all that Nietzsche's remembered for saying. Talk about gatekeeping. They even took off the next line to make it more hateful toward him. He said, God is dead and we killed him. It's us. It's our responsibility, that sort of thing. And it's Saturday and God is dead and Jesus is in hell. Have you ever heard that? That's what Msgr Kaminski told us one year at Easter time. Sitting in the back row with my dad and everybody else, but sometimes just my dad. There's Msgr Francis T. Kaminski telling us that on Saturday, Jesus was in hell. He taught us that between his death and resurrection thing, that he was in hell. And that's how he opened the gates to heaven, was because when he came back up, he opened the gates, and all those people, like in the old Hades times, you know, you look at Homer's The Odyssey. I've got the Iliad, I finally got a hold of it. I haven't read it yet, but in the Odyssey, you know, Hades, just these wandering souls, you know, they don't know if they did anything wrong or not. There's nothing left of the person that they were, but so they're stuck in hell. And so when he came up, supposedly, he got him out. I don't know what went on in there. Who can say what goes on in a maximum security prison over a 3-day period? But I'm sure he was getting ready to get the hell out of there by the time the time came. So there it is. Msgr Kaminski. You see, my father was to be a priest. He was the chosen one from the family. He was the virgin until marriage. And then after that, it was all over. He wasn't interested in being a priest anymore. He kept pumping out kids. It was just too good, you know. Life on earth. Take what you can get. But I was supposed to be a priest too. And I had chosen to be. And then there I was, an altar boy, you know. Msgr Kaminski, the man I revered. There, beginning of 6th grade, he was going around to my grandpa, Judja. He was going to my dad. He was having dinners at the houses and trying to convince us to stay in the public school because my dad couldn't afford to send us all to St. Mary's anymore. It was just too expensive. And my dad doesn't take charity, so even though he's trying to talk him into, they'll cut his rates, he wasn't into that. And the funny thing is, there, when he came to dinner at our house, sometime before that, my oldest brother and his buddies had, and my oldest brother does not smoke. He quit it right there in that time. He had a dream. But he does not smoke. But they had seeds, and they threw them in one of my mom's plants. And my mother could never grow plants. Everything she tried to grow died. And in one of her plants that she had in there, they threw him in there, and as a joke, him and his buddies. And these little weeds are growing up, and she's looking at them, she's like, there's something growing in there. It looks like a weed. And my brother and his friend, and I was in on the joke. I was just a little kid, but I knew what was going on. And as it got big enough, she finally realized that it was a marijuana plant. She was like, she said, but it's so pretty. And she gave it plant food and just watered it, took care of it. Like, you know, she did everything she ever did to anything else. It's just that she couldn't get anything else to grow. Huh. This thing was 6 foot tall. It had a stalk with bark around it rolling up. And it might, I don't know, I understand that it's a male because it never budded. But there's Msgr Kaminski sitting at our place having dinner, trying to talk us into staying in Catholic school, and that plant is 6 feet tall in the next room, just raw in all its glory, more perfect than Christ himself. And so this is the guy that on the first day of 6th grade, when we were going to public school for the first time that year, I served 7 o'clock mass, so I could get on my little bike and get to church and serve mass and still get to school on time. And after mass in the sacristy, Kaminski there, he says, so, Judas, are your parents sending you to St. Mary's again this year? I said, no, Monsignor, I'm in my little altar boy outfit. I said, they're sending us to the public school. And he said, you know, God won't bless you anymore. And I went, Kuh! There I was, a kid that was to be a priest. I was chosen. And he says that. And then he kept going and going and going. But I don't hear another thing he said, because as soon as he said, God won't bless you anymore, I knew my place. I thought to myself, I'm an 11-year-old kid, and you're gonna say this to me? What kind of sick bastard are you? I've never even given him the joy of me pissing on his grave. He's not worth it. My mother was worried I was going to, but I don't care. And it was after that, sitting there, sometime after they called the house, and they said, because they couldn't get enough altar boys anymore from the Catholic school, those firm believers would not serve the faith. They asked me to come back, and I didn't talk on the phone, but I told my mom when she was talking, I said, tell them no. But the truth is, it was the first time in my life that I felt the feeling that comes from behind. Go fuck yourself. And my father and I were sitting in church once after that in the back row, just the two of us. And I was just thinking, because there's plenty of time to think in church. What they're saying has been said every year. It's in a cycle. You got it all worked out. I used to be able to do the church until they changed the words. Last time I was in church, I was there for a wedding, and I'm getting told, we don't say that anymore. I'm like, why the fuck not? You people are out of your minds. You're just trying to keep an eye on who comes all the time, changing things constantly. And I'm sitting there thinking, you know, Jesus is coming back. I may not be the chosen one, but he's going to need a friend. And I thought, I am Judas. And through the years, this whole Judas thing has followed through us. And it was Kaminski that said, Jesus is in hell right now. And so what was going on when Jesus was in hell? This is the sad part of this story. He had a really good night the night before. He had 20 pounds, 20 silver pieces, which back then is probably worth about, I don't know, $500 today, $1,000, I don't know, whatever it costs. But he had 20 set aside out of that 40 to pay the Magdalene, but he talked her down to 10. Why? Because she wasn't even in it for the money, but like all the rules that I'm saying, they got all the rules. He had to take the money. He had to take the money. Get out. And to make it official, they couldn't just pick him up. They have their rules. You take the money. And so the same way as the government has their rules, you take the money. So does a whore. Got to take the money. Lest I fall in love. They need to feel like it's for the money. Because they need to be so empty. They need to be so empty to live through a terrible life like this. If that's not one of their choosing. So he talked her down to 10. And she took it. And he kept the other 30 for himself. The day before, he spent it on the people that he knew. But this was supposed to be 30 for him and Christ. And Christ didn't show up, so he kept it for himself. And so the next day, this day, while Jesus is in hell, Judas wakes up. And just the same with me. I've seen both my brothers at weddings getting loaded because the old guys at weddings like giving the 16-year-olds beer just to get them loaded and watch them puke in the toilet. I've seen both of my brothers puke in the toilets at weddings and say the next day, I will never drink again. Never once in my life have I said that. Never once. Because I learned from watching the follies of others. The things that don't mean anything. Because they're still drinking. Even though my second brother says he doesn't. He showed up at my dad's house with a couple of nice beers. Not the kind that you buy just 6-pack of some crappy light beer because you're staying in shape and you bring them by. He had good beer, which means he's drinking, even though he says he doesn't. The only times I haven't drunk, it's been for a reason. And I didn't hide it because for me to try to hide that I'm not drinking, what's in your hand? There's good. Yeah, some people you just know if there's a problem. So I never hide it. make up some pretty cool stories about it, though. And so there's Judas. He had that whole 30 pounds to himself after being with a woman, and got one of the hardest hangovers of his life. There, waking up Saturday under a tree, not too far from his house. He just was miserable, splitting headache, just everything. I mean, I can't even try to describe what kind of terrible hangover he had, because for him to have said, I am never drinking again, that's what that extra 30 was for, behind the rake. So he went back to his house and he got the last 30, which he set aside behind the rake to get the hangover off. But this was just I'm never drinking again. And the only way he could get away with that, he took a rope back from the tool shed with that 30 pieces. Why he didn't put it, I don't know. Who's to say? And he went and he climbed that tree. And he held that bag of 30 pieces in his hand. And he didn't lower himself from the tree and strangle himself. Not like people that want to suffer. I once knew a cop in Gaylord that was what I thought of as a really good person. Not every cop you meet is a good person. There's a lot of rage that leads a person down that path. There's rage, there's pride, there's a mistaken sense of wanting to help. Cops aren't allowed to help. They don't make their quota if they help. So, the point is, that guy I knew, he was accused of some sort of nefarious activity with his stepdaughter, and I didn't believe it at first, and then he hanged himself in the basement of his house. And what that made me realize was that this guy hanged himself. He was guilty. A person that hangs himself wants to suffer. They're trying to atone for what they've done. But Judas, he climbed that tree with this in his hand and a rope around his neck, and he didn't just slowly roll down to it. He jumped off the highest branch and broke his neck, thinking that he'd be still holding this money in his hand as a sign. You made me take this. You wouldn't let me take it back. But instead, it fell to his feet. And there's Saturday. This is the end of Judas. And Jesus is still in hell. I wonder if they met each other on the way by at the gates, and if Msgr Kaminski was taking tickets and checking IDs.